In today's video, I wanted to talk about hardcore, specifically Diablo for hardcore play. Uh, I recently started dabbling in it, and I found there was a lot of things I learned along the way. And one of the most common questions that I get when people come and talk to me about it, or when they're looking for advice on how to get started into it, or how to get over that hump, level 50 to 60 seems to be a big hump for a lot of people, and people are constantly asking me questions on like how do I get through that hump? What mindset, what tips, what tricks, what do I need to do to have more success playing hardcore? So these 10 tips are more of advice. These aren't, the end all be all. These aren't cheats. Like, these aren't fast shortcuts to get you through. This is changing your mindset coming from softcore into hardcore. And they're in no particular order, but I wanted to break them down for each of you just to kind of help you get through that. Number one being delete your softcore mindset. Like, get that out of your brain. Come in with a fresh view on things. All the typical things that you would have looked at softcore, the pace, the things you went after, when you decide to change your items out, all those kind of things, rework that in your head. You need to come in with an open mind and forget how you used to play on softcore. That's number one. Number two, and I think this is the biggest piece of advice I can give anybody coming in, don't worry about what the meta is. Play the class that you're most familiar with, the class that you've played the most over all the seasons, the class that the Paragon board, the skills, that you can move things in and out as you need them. For me, it was Barbarian. I've played Barbarian more than anything else, so I knew going in it wasn't meta this season. I knew that I could take points from here and put them to there to have more survivability at the beginning, and then rework them later on and switch this for that. I already knew that in my head, that I could move things around to make myself more effective, and then put them back later on when I need the damage back, whatever the case might be. So going in with a class that you're familiar with and it's going to give you much more success, and it's going to make it much cleaner. You're going to have that goal already in mind on what you want your build to look like in the end. So that's number two. Number three, and I think this is almost equally as important, is to avoid pre-made builds. Don't go to your favorite streamer, your favorite creator, and use a build that they're using. For one, 99% of those builds are meant for softcore. They are pure DPS. Those builds are meant to slam out as much damage as they can. They'll put in a little survivability components here and there just so that you can stay alive to do most of your damage. But they're taking into account, how do I min-max the amount of damage this character has? They are not thinking about survivability. They are not worrying about dying. Those builds, unless you're familiar with the paragons and the skill trees, you can use them as starting points, but generally just stay away from them. Because 99% of creators aren't building for hardcore. There is those, odd few out there that are, but they're putting things in places because they understand that class, and they're going to be able to effectively use that class based on that build. If you don't have that same experience, it's not going to work for you. So maybe have like a pre-made setup in your head of like what you've used in the past that's worked, and be open-minded to changing things, but I would just avoid pre-made builds altogether. Number four, don't fear defensive roles. That was my biggest hurdle when I first started. You're used to using your tempers on primarily offensive rolls. You're used to re-rolling your gear for offensive rolls. If you need to re-roll something to get your resistance, re-roll it. If you need to put a temper on to get resistance, put the temper on to get resistance. If you need to beef up armor or beef up something on the back end that you're not going to be able to, attain right away, use your rolls, use your tempers, use your actual rolls on the gear itself to get that stuff in, because it's extremely important. There's no coming back from death. So if you can squeeze out a little more DPS, it's not going to matter for day. So don't be afraid to use rolls on your gear to up your defense. Number five, you won't have your renown. This was the biggest hurdle for me, and I see for a lot of people coming in, is you don't have that paragon. You don't have all those points you normally have in your paragon points. You're missing all those skill points, so even if you try to use a pre-made build, you're already going to have to readjust in your head because you're missing all those skill points. So keep that in mind when you're going in. You're not going to have it all, and you're going to need to decide for yourself what's more important. And the next one, that kind of leads me into the next one, which is your max resists and the mods on your gear, the aspects on your gear, are important from the beginning. Like, yeah, until you get to level 50, you can squeeze by with the odds and ends. Once you start getting there, even with sacred gear, use the one temper that's on them. Use what you have available to you. Start maxing out your resistances the best you can with the gear you have, because that's what's going to save you from a lot of these one hits, especially when it comes to like elemental damage. Outside of poison, a lot of the one hits you get in the game are from the other elementals. Poison, you have a chance to heal through, but everything else, it's going to hit you and you're not going to have time to react. It's instant damage. So use that stuff from the beginning. Don't be afraid of wasting mats or wasting gold, because it's not a waste if it's getting you to that next stage that you haven't been able to previously get to. So use that stuff and break down gear so you have the aspects to build the stuff you want to build. And don't worry necessarily about gold until later on. Number 7, use barrier and defense skills. Again, this isn't common in most classes for softcore. Outside of maybe the sorcerer using the flame shield and whatnot. That's an extremely basic part of every single build, because sorcerers are essentially glass cannons, so you're always going to have those in. But for barbarians, for example, use iron skin. For druids, use earthen bulwark. Make sure you have those essentially get out of jail free cards when you need them. Make sure that you are building those up so you can use them in the worst case scenario. And other defensive skills that you might not put points in regularly. Look at those skills beforehand and decide, are they going to benefit you? Are they going to give you damage reduction? Are they going to give you resistances? Are they going to give you fortify? Those are going to be extremely important when you're playing hardcore. Next, it kind of leads me into it, is try not to advance too quickly. It's not a race, right? If this is your first entry into the hardcore scene, you're not racing to try to get to 100. You're not racing to end game. Like the experience people might be with their friends, or for whatever clout that might come with it. Your goal is to get there. So don't advance too soon. Most people are relatively set in those points where it's like 35 you do the first capstone, 55 or whatever you do the next one. Like, throw that out the window. Do it safe. Make sure your character's built up. Do it when you're almost the equal level, or the equal level with the mobs inside, so that the defensive reduction is not a huge component. Just go at a slower and more comfortable pace. That's going to give you a huge advantage. I guess, this kind of falls back into the other ones, but be aware of the skill downfalls of some of the stuff you're using. A lot of skills have downfalls associated with them. Let's take into account Juggernaut. I use Juggernaut quite a bit, leveling a barbarian in hardcore to get me to armor cap. Armor cap is extremely important. But if you're maybe using a rogue and having that evade cooldown reduction, that might be a huge hindrance to the survivability of a rogue more than the armor is. Especially if you're already close, or the armor gap's not huge. Having your evade from Metamorphosis or from Juggernaut changed is going to affect you more than it's going to affect somebody else. So think about that stuff when you're putting stuff on your gear. And then I guess kind of the most important one of all is play when you can focus. A lot of us play casually, family around, people around. It's not a big deal. You die in softcore, you come back to your computer screen, you fix it, you go to the next part, you're good. If you have distractions, if you have movies open, YouTube videos running, people talking to you, try to cut that stuff out until you're experienced with hardcore. So all it takes is that quick look over and look back, and all of a sudden you're just trying to spam a healing potion and you're dead. Believe me, it happens so quick. So when you're playing hardcore, make sure that you're on, that moment, and try to play from your most reliable source. I played hardcore a little bit from my Steam Deck. I'm way more prone to having an internet issue or a crash on my Steam Deck than when I'm playing on my PC. And I had a couple scares playing hardcore on my Steam Deck, trying to grind out my renown, because renown is extremely important. You need that renown to get your healing potions, your skill points, all that kind of stuff. So if I was laying on the couch chilling out, I'd run a few dungeons, not nightmare dungeons, but just dungeons to get those renown points. And I had a couple disconnects because you're playing wirelessly, and it scared the shit out of me, to be honest. So this is a huge thing to take into account. So I tried until I wasn't worried about dying anymore to play strictly from my PC. Again, these 10 tips aren't going to get you to 100. They're not going to, give you a fast track. But if you take into account these things when you are playing hardcore and you're making your builds, they're going to give you, an advantage versus just going in and trying to play the way you did at softcore. And, you know, it's an extremely different game because you have to think about different things and build your build differently. So for me, it was a lot of fun because I'm so used to just smashing out DPS and softcore. And it's one of the most common questions I got in stream while I was playing and leveling because, I only had one, issue where I died. And it's, I've used it for shorts and clips and whatnot where I rushed in and got one shotted. But people were like, how do you get over that hump? How'd you make it to 100 so easy? What'd you do? I took my time. I use these 10, tips that I've given here of backing up, slowing down, and rethinking the way I approach the game. And it was effective for me. And I think it'll continue to be effective for me. You just got to kind of check out your softcore mindset and bring in that new mindset when you switch into hardcore. So again, this video helped you. If you found any of this information useful, don't forget to subscribe, like the video. It all helps, and I appreciate it more than you think. So again, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm out. Thanks.